Hey there, and welcome back to another deep dive into the ancient world. Before we begin tonight's journey into one of Rome's most misunderstood professions, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Drop a comment below. It's always fascinating to see our global community of history enthusiasts coming together to explore the past. If you enjoy these calm, thoughtful explorations of ancient civilizations, consider hitting that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you're interested in more content like this. Now settle in as we explore a topic that might challenge everything you thought you knew about women's lives in ancient Rome. Tonight, we're examining why, for many women in the Eternal City, prostitution wasn't just an option, it was often the best option available. And before you click away thinking this is some sensationalized clickbait, let me assure you, the historical reality is far more complex and fascinating than you might imagine. Picture this. You're a woman in ancient Rome around the 1st century CE. The morning sun filters through the narrow streets of the Subura, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. You wake up not in some cramped, squalid hovel, as Hollywood might have you believe, but in your own modest apartment. You have money in your purse, food on your table, and most remarkably for a woman of your time, you have choices. Real choices about your life, your body, and your future. This isn't fiction. This was the reality for thousands of women who chose prostitution in ancient Rome. And yes, I said chose because contrary to popular belief, many prostitutes in Rome weren't victims or slaves. They were entrepreneurs operating in one of the few professions where a woman could achieve genuine economic independence. But how did we get so wrong about this? Why do we imagine ancient Roman prostitutes as downtrodden victims when the historical evidence tells a very different story? Well, it turns out our modern assumptions about sex work have colored our understanding of the past in ways that would probably shock the Romans themselves. See, we tend to project our contemporary moral frameworks onto ancient civilizations, assuming that what we consider degrading or shameful today was viewed the same way 2,000 years ago. But Roman society operated under completely different social, economic, and sexual norms. What we might see as exploitation, they often saw as opportunity. The truth is, for a woman born into the lower classes of Roman society, the traditional paths to security and prosperity were severely limited. You could marry young, probably to a man chosen by your family, and spend your life bearing children while managing a household with little to no legal rights or personal autonomy. You could work as a domestic servant, earning barely enough to survive while being completely dependent on your master's whims. Or you could try your hand at one of the few trades open to women, like weaving or food preparation, competing against countless others for minimal wages. But there was another path, a path that offered something almost unthinkable for women in the ancient world: financial independence, social mobility, and a degree of personal autonomy that married women could only dream of. Now, before we go any further, I need to address something important. I'm not romanticizing prostitution or suggesting it was easy or without risks. Ancient Rome was still a patriarchal society with its own forms of exploitation and danger. What I am saying is that within the constraints of their world, prostitution offered opportunities that simply didn't exist elsewhere for women of certain social classes. And the Romans themselves seemed to understand this. Unlike many other ancient civilizations that heavily stigmatized sex work, Roman society had a surprisingly pragmatic and even accepting attitude toward prostitution. It was legal, it was regulated, and it was considered a normal part of urban life. Prostitutes paid taxes, had legal protections, and could even achieve a level of social respectability that would have been impossible in other professions. But here's where it gets really interesting. The most successful prostitutes in Rome weren't just selling sex, they were selling sophistication. These were the courtesans, the high-end sex workers who entertained the wealthy and powerful. They were educated, cultured, and often became influential figures in their own right. Some accumulated enough wealth to buy their freedom if they were slaves, purchase property, and even become patrons of the arts. Think about that for a moment. In a society where most women had virtually no economic power, where they couldn't inherit property, couldn't engage in most forms of business, and were legally under the control of male relatives, prostitution offered a path to genuine independence. It was one of the few professions where a woman's success depended primarily on her own skills, intelligence, and business acumen, rather than her family connections or husband's status. And the earning potential was substantial. A skilled courtesan could charge fees that exceeded what most craftsmen made in a month. The most exclusive sex workers commanded prices that put them among the highest earners in Roman society, regardless of gender. We have records of prostitutes who became wealthy enough to own multiple properties, maintain households of servants, and live lives of luxury that rivaled those of the aristocracy. But it wasn't just about the money, though the financial incentives were undeniably powerful. Prostitution also offered something equally valuable: freedom of movement and association. While respectable Roman women were expected to remain largely confined to their homes, prostitutes moved freely through the city. They attended public events, engaged in business transactions, and formed social networks that crossed class boundaries. This mobility translated into opportunities that extended far beyond sex work itself. Many prostitutes used their earnings and connections to branch out into other businesses. They opened taverns, invested in property, and some even became moneylenders. Their profession gave them access to information, influence, and capital that they could leverage into entirely different careers. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Surely this only applied to a small elite of high-end courtesans? What about the average sex worker? Well, here's where the historical record gets really fascinating. Even lower-tier prostitutes in Rome enjoyed advantages that were remarkable for their time. For starters, they had legal protections that didn't exist for many other workers. Roman law recognized prostitution as legitimate labor, which meant sex workers could seek legal recourse if they were cheated, assaulted, or otherwise wronged. They could own property, enter into contracts, and even testify in court under certain circumstances. These weren't privileges extended to all women in Roman society, but they were available to prostitutes. Moreover, the social stigma we associate with sex work today was much less pronounced in ancient Rome. While prostitutes occupied a specific social category that was distinct from respectable married women, they weren't necessarily viewed as degraded or shameful. In fact, some of the most celebrated women in Roman literature and history were courtesans who were admired for their wit, beauty, and influence. The poet Ovid wrote admiringly of skilled courtesans, praising their intelligence and sophistication. Pliny the Elder mentions prostitutes who became famous throughout the empire for their talents. These weren't women hiding in shadows, they were public figures who commanded respect and admiration, even if they operated outside conventional social norms. And let's talk about autonomy, because this is perhaps the most striking aspect of prostitution in ancient Rome. While married women were legally under the authority of their husbands or male relatives, prostitutes operated as independent agents. They made their own decisions about clients, set their own prices, and controlled their own schedules. For many women, this level of personal autonomy was unprecedented. Some prostitutes even formed professional associations, early versions of guilds that provided mutual support and collective bargaining power. These organizations helped members navigate legal issues, provided financial assistance during difficult times, and created networks of solidarity that extended throughout the profession. But perhaps most remarkably, prostitution in Rome offered something that was almost impossible to achieve through any other means: the possibility of social mobility. We have documented cases of prostitutes who not only achieved personal wealth, but also elevated their social status to the point where they could marry into respectable families or establish themselves as independent businesswomen. The most famous example is probably Theodora, who started as an actress and courtesan in Constantinople and eventually became Byzantine empress. While her story is exceptional, it illustrates the potential for advancement that existed within the profession. Even more modest success stories abound in the historical record, women who used their earnings from sex work to build better lives for themselves and their families. Now, you might be wondering about the practical realities of this profession. How exactly did it work? What were the day-to-day experiences of these women, and how did Roman society organize and regulate an industry that was so integral to urban life? Well, that's where our story gets even more interesting. The Roman approach to prostitution was remarkably systematic and sophisticated. They didn't just tolerate sex work, they actively managed it through a complex system of licensing, taxation, and regulation that treated it like any other legitimate business. Prostitutes were required to register with local authorities and pay regular taxes on their earnings. In return, they received legal recognition and protection. The state collected substantial revenue from the sex trade, which funded public works and civic improvements. It was, in many ways, a mutually beneficial arrangement that recognized the economic reality of the profession while providing safeguards for those involved. The physical infrastructure of Roman prostitution was equally sophisticated. Purpose-built brothels, known as lupenaria, were constructed throughout the city with specialized architecture designed for both privacy and safety. These weren't crude, makeshift establishments, but professional venues that catered to different economic segments of the market. But here's what's really fascinating. Many prostitutes didn't work in brothels at all. They operated independently, renting their own spaces or working from private residences. Some even traveled to provide services to wealthy clients in their homes. This level of professional flexibility was almost unheard of in other occupations available to women. And the clientele? Well, that's another aspect that challenges our modern assumptions. Prostitution in Rome wasn't primarily about desperate men seeking release. It was often about sophisticated social and sexual relationships that could last for years. Many clients developed ongoing relationships with specific prostitutes, relationships that resembled modern dating more than anonymous transactions. Some of these relationships involved genuine affection and mutual respect. We have love letters between prostitutes and their clients, poems written in their honor, and legal documents showing men who left substantial bequests to their favorite courtesans. These weren't just business transactions, they were complex human relationships that often provided emotional as well as physical intimacy. The educational aspect of the profession was also significant. Many courtesans were highly educated, trained not just in sexual arts, but in music, poetry, conversation, and other cultural accomplishments. They served as companions and entertainers for men who valued intellectual as well as physical stimulation. In some cases, they were more educated than the wives of their clients, who had been raised primarily for domestic duties rather than public engagement. This educational component created another avenue for economic advancement. Successful courtesans often became teachers themselves, training younger women in the arts of their profession. Some established schools or academies where they passed on not just sexual techniques, but also music, literature, and social skills. This created a kind of professional lineage that helped maintain standards and provided mentorship for newcomers to the field. The international character of Rome also created unique opportunities for prostitutes. The city attracted visitors from throughout the empire and beyond, creating a diverse clientele with varying tastes and substantial wealth. A skilled courtesan could build a reputation that extended far beyond Rome itself, attracting clients from distant provinces who would travel specifically to visit her. Some prostitutes became so renowned that they were essentially celebrities of their time. Their names were known throughout the empire, their opinions were sought on matters of fashion and culture, and their endorsements could make or break new trends. This level of influence was almost unprecedented for women in the ancient world and represented a form of soft power that extended far beyond the bedroom. But let's step back and consider the broader context that made all of this possible. Why was Roman society so different from other ancient civilizations in its treatment of prostitution? What cultural and economic factors created an environment where sex work could flourish as a legitimate profession? Part of the answer lies in Roman pragmatism. The Romans were, above all, practical people who tended to regulate rather than prohibit activities that were going to happen anyway. They recognized that sexual desire was a natural human drive, and that attempting to suppress it entirely was both futile and potentially destabilizing. Better to channel it through legal, regulated means that could be taxed and controlled. This pragmatic approach extended to their treatment of women more generally. While Roman society was certainly patriarchal, it was also remarkably flexible in some ways. Women could own property, engage in business, and achieve a degree of independence that was unusual for the ancient world. This created space for prostitution to emerge as a legitimate profession rather than a purely exploitative arrangement. The economic structure of Roman society also played a crucial role. The empire's vast wealth created a large class of men with substantial disposable income and leisure time. These weren't desperate individuals seeking release, but affluent customers who could afford to pay premium prices for sophisticated services. This economic reality made high-end prostitution a genuinely lucrative profession. Moreover, the urban character of Roman civilization created conditions that favored the sex trade. Large cities with diverse populations, extensive commercial networks, and complex social hierarchies provided the perfect environment for prostitution to flourish. The anonymity and opportunity that cities offered made it possible for women to enter and succeed in the profession in ways that would have been impossible in smaller, more traditional communities. The religious and cultural attitudes of the Romans also differed significantly from those of other ancient peoples. While they certainly had moral codes and social expectations, sexuality wasn't viewed with the same suspicion and shame that characterized some other cultures. Sexual pleasure was seen as a natural part of human experience, and the Romans had a relatively sophisticated understanding of desire and attraction. This more open attitude toward sexuality extended to their treatment of prostitutes. While sex workers occupied a specific social category, they weren't viewed as inherently immoral or degraded. Instead, they were seen as providing a necessary and valuable service that contributed to social stability and personal satisfaction. As we delve deeper into this fascinating world, we'll discover how the daily lives of these women unfolded, what challenges they faced, and how they navigated the complex social and economic landscape of ancient Rome. We'll explore the different types of sex work available, from street-level prostitution to elite courtesan services, and examine how women move between these different levels of the profession. We'll also look at the legal frameworks that governed their work, the business practices they employed, and the strategies they used to build wealth and security in an uncertain world. Most importantly, we'll see how these women, working within the constraints of their time, managed to carve out spaces of autonomy and opportunity that challenge conventional expectations about women's roles in ancient society. Because ultimately, that's what this story is really about: how human beings, faced with limited options and difficult circumstances, find ways to create better lives for themselves and their families. It's about adaptability, resilience, and the eternal human drive to seek freedom and prosperity wherever they might be found. The story of prostitution in ancient Rome isn't just about sex work, it's about economics, social mobility, female agency, and the complex ways that societies organize themselves around fundamental human needs and desires. It's a story that challenges our assumptions about the past and forces us to reconsider what we think we know about women's lives in the ancient world. So stick around as we continue this journey into one of history's most misunderstood professions. Because I promise you, the reality of prostitution in ancient Rome is far more complex, fascinating, and surprising than anything you've probably imagined. But before we explore the intricate business mechanics of Roman sex work, we need to understand the economic reality that made this profession so attractive in the first place. Picture yourself as a free-born Roman woman from a poor family in the 2nd century CE. Your father is a day laborer, your mother takes in washing, and your family lives in a cramped apartment above a bakery in the Suburra. What are your realistic options for making a living? You could work in textile production, hunched over a loom for 12 hours a day, earning barely enough denarii to buy bread and oil. Your fingers would be permanently stained with dye, your back bent from constant labor, and your earnings would never amount to more than subsistence wages. Most women in this trade never accumulated enough wealth to improve their circumstances meaningfully. Alternatively, you might find work as a barmaid or serving girl in a tavern. The pay would be slightly better, but you'd be subject to constant harassment from drunk patrons, with little legal recourse if things went wrong. Your reputation would suffer from association with such establishments, making marriage to a respectable man unlikely. And if the tavern owner decided he no longer needed your services, you'd be back on the streets with no savings to fall back on. Domestic service was another possibility, working as a slave or freedwoman in a wealthy household. While this might provide food and shelter, you'd have no personal freedom, no opportunity to accumulate wealth, and you'd be entirely dependent on your master's goodwill. Many domestic servants worked their entire lives without ever achieving independence or security. Now contrast these limited options with what prostitution offered. A moderately attractive woman with basic social skills could earn more in a single night than a textile worker made in a month. The mathematics were simple and compelling. While other professions trapped women in cycles of poverty, sex work provided a realistic path to financial independence. But the economic advantages went far beyond immediate earnings. Prostitution offered something virtually unprecedented for women of the lower classes: the opportunity to accumulate capital. Unlike other forms of women's work, which barely provided subsistence wages, successful sex workers could save substantial sums that they could then invest in property, businesses, or other income-generating assets. We have archaeological evidence of prostitutes who owned multiple properties throughout the city. Some operated their own brothels, employing other women and taking a percentage of their earnings. Others invested in taverns, shops, or even shipping ventures. The profession provided not just immediate income, but also access to the kind of business networks and investment opportunities that were typically reserved for men. The taxation records from Pompeii reveal something fascinating about the economic status of sex workers. Many prostitutes paid property taxes on substantial holdings, indicating wealth levels that placed them firmly in the middle class or above. Some paid more in taxes than respected craftsmen or small merchants, demonstrating that their profession could indeed be highly lucrative. This earning potential was particularly remarkable when you consider the social mobility it enabled. We have documented cases of prostitutes who used their wealth to purchase Roman citizenship for themselves or their children, effectively buying their way into higher social classes. In a society where birth largely determined destiny, sex work offered one of the few avenues for genuine upward mobility. The seasonal nature of Roman commerce also worked in prostitutes' favor. During major festivals, games, or military victories, the city would swell with visitors from across the empire. These temporary residents had money to spend and were looking for entertainment. A skilled courtesan could earn enough during these peak periods to live comfortably for months, giving her time to pursue other interests or business ventures. Consider the case of Demetria, a courtesan whose story is preserved in the letters of a Roman senator. She began working as a prostitute in her late teens, and within 5 years had accumulated enough wealth to purchase a substantial house near the Forum. She used the ground floor as a high-end brothel while living in luxury on the upper floors. By her 30s, she had invested her earnings in several businesses and was wealthy enough to retire from sex work entirely, living as a respectable businesswoman for the rest of her life. Demetria's story wasn't unique. The legal archives contain numerous examples of former prostitutes who became property owners, business operators, and even moneylenders. Some achieved enough social respectability to arrange advantageous marriages for their daughters, breaking the cycle of poverty that had defined their own early lives. The professional flexibility of prostitution also set it apart from other women's occupations. While a weaver was tied to her loom and a barmaid to her tavern, prostitutes could work independently, set their own schedules, and choose their clients. This autonomy was revolutionary for women in a society that typically offered them little control over their own lives. Many prostitutes operated what we might today call consulting businesses, offering their services to a select clientele on their own terms. They could refuse customers they didn't like, set premium prices for their time, and even take vacations or sabbaticals when they chose. This level of professional independence was almost unheard of for women in any other occupation. The intellectual demands of high-end prostitution also created opportunities for personal development that other professions simply didn't offer. Successful courtesans needed to be conversationalists, entertainers, and social facilitators. They studied literature, music, and philosophy to better serve their educated clientele. Many became genuinely learned women whose intellectual accomplishments rivaled those of men from much higher social backgrounds. This educational component had practical benefits beyond just attracting clients. Literate prostitutes could manage their own finances, negotiate contracts, and engage in business correspondence. Some became informal advisors to their clients on matters ranging from politics to investments, leveraging their intelligence and social connections into additional income streams. The networking opportunities inherent in the profession were particularly valuable. Prostitutes interacted with men from all levels of Roman society, from wealthy merchants to government officials to military commanders. These connections could lead to business opportunities, investment tips, and social introductions that would have been impossible to obtain through other means. Some prostitutes became informal intelligence brokers, selling information gathered from pillow talk to interested parties. Others used their connections to arrange business deals between clients, taking commissions for their matchmaking services. The social access that came with their profession opened doors that remained firmly closed to women in more respectable occupations. The international character of Rome created additional opportunities for entrepreneurial sex workers. Prostitutes who spoke multiple languages could cater to foreign visitors, often charging premium rates for their specialized services. Some built reputations that extended throughout the empire, attracting wealthy clients who would travel specifically to visit them. We have records of prostitutes who essentially became traveling consultants, visiting major cities throughout the empire to serve their elite clientele. These women lived lives of luxury that rivaled those of wealthy merchants or government officials, staying in the finest accommodations and commanding enormous fees for their services. The legal protections available to prostitutes also contributed to the profession's attractiveness. Roman law treated sex work as legitimate commerce, which meant prostitutes could seek legal recourse if they were cheated or mistreated. They could own property in their own names, enter into binding contracts, and even sue clients who failed to pay agreed-upon fees. This legal recognition was crucial for building long-term financial security. Prostitutes could invest their earnings with confidence, knowing that their property rights would be protected by law. They could also engage in legitimate business ventures without worrying that their past profession would invalidate their commercial activities. The guild system that emerged around prostitution provided additional support and protection. These professional associations offered everything from legal assistance to financial loans to retirement planning. Members looked out for each other's interests, shared information about dangerous clients, and provided mutual aid during difficult times. Some guilds even operated their own burial societies, ensuring that members would receive proper funeral rights regardless of their family situation. This was particularly important for women who had been disowned by their families for entering the profession or who had no male relatives to arrange their final rites. The retirement prospects for successful prostitutes were also remarkably good compared to other occupations available to women. While a domestic servant might work until she died, and a textile worker would likely face poverty in old age, successful sex workers could accumulate enough wealth to retire comfortably while still relatively young. Many former prostitutes used their savings to open legitimate businesses, often employing other women and contributing to the broader economy. Some became patrons of the arts, funding public works, or supporting young artists and writers. Their economic success enabled them to give back to their communities in ways that enhanced their social standing and legacy. The health and safety considerations, while certainly present, were often better managed in prostitution than in other occupations available to poor women. Professional prostitutes had access to contraceptives and abortifacients that other women couldn't afford. They could afford better nutrition and medical care than factory workers or domestic servants. The better establishments employed guards and maintained security measures that protected workers from violence. Clients who mistreated prostitutes could be banned from reputable establishments, creating economic incentives for good behavior that didn't exist in other service industries. The psychological benefits of the profession, though harder to quantify, were also significant. While other forms of women's work were often mind-numbingly repetitive and offered no prospects for advancement, prostitution required intelligence, creativity, and interpersonal skills. Many women found the work intellectually stimulating and personally fulfilling in ways that factory labor or domestic service never could be. The social relationships formed through the profession often provided emotional support and companionship that ameliorated the isolation many poor women experienced. The community of sex workers, their clients, and associated businesses created social networks that enriched women's lives beyond just the economic benefits. As we continue our exploration of this fascinating world, we'll delve deeper into the specific business models that made Roman prostitution so successful, the various career paths available within the profession, and the remarkable stories of individual women who used sex work as a springboard to achieve wealth, influence, and social respectability that would have been impossible through any other means available to them. Because ultimately, understanding why prostitution was often the best option for women in ancient Rome requires us to see it not through modern moral frameworks, but through the eyes of women who faced real constraints and limited choices in their daily lives. For many of them, sex work wasn't a last resort or a sign of desperation. It was a calculated business decision that offered the best possible path to the independence, security, and prosperity they sought. The evidence suggests that many of these women succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, building lives of comfort and respectability that their sisters in other professions could never hope to achieve. Their stories challenge our assumptions about both ancient Rome and the nature of sex work itself, revealing a complex world where women found ways to thrive despite the limitations of their time and place. But to truly understand how revolutionary this economic opportunity was, we need to examine the specific business models that made Roman sex work so remarkably profitable. Because this wasn't just about individual transactions, it was about sophisticated commercial enterprises that operated with the efficiency and organization of any major Roman industry. The most basic level of the profession involved street prostitutes who worked independently, often in designated areas near public baths, theaters, or markets. Even at this entry level, the earning potential exceeded most alternatives available to women. A street prostitute could typically earn between 2 and 5 sestertii per client, while a female textile worker might earn only 8 sestertii for an entire day's labor. The mathematics were simple and compelling, but the real money lay in specialization and reputation building. Successful prostitutes quickly learned that developing a regular clientele was far more profitable than relying on random encounters. These ongoing relationships, known as patronage arrangements, provided steady income and often included additional benefits like gifts, housing, or business investments from wealthy patrons. Consider the business model of a typical mid-level prostitute named Claudia, whose financial records were preserved in a Pompeii archive. She maintained relationships with approximately 15 regular clients, each paying her a monthly retainer of 50 sestertii in exchange for exclusive access on certain days. This arrangement alone provided her with 750 sestertii per month, roughly equivalent to what a skilled craftsman might earn. But Claudia didn't stop there. She also accepted occasional clients at premium rates, charged extra for specialized services, and received substantial gifts during religious festivals and personal celebrations. Her total monthly income often exceeded 1,200 sestertii, placing her firmly in the upper middle class of Roman society. Most remarkably, she achieved this level of financial success while maintaining complete control over her schedule and client selection. The luxury courtesan market represented the pinnacle of the profession's earning potential. These elite sex workers commanded fees that rivaled those of the highest-paid professionals in Roman society. A single evening with a renowned courtesan might cost anywhere from 500 to 2,000 sestertii, depending on her reputation and the exclusivity of the encounter. These weren't simple sexual transactions, but elaborate social experiences that might include dinner, entertainment, intellectual conversation, and companionship that extended well beyond the bedroom. Courtesans were expected to be accomplished in music, poetry, dancing, and sophisticated conversation. Many spoke multiple languages and were well versed in philosophy, literature, and current events. The educational requirements created barriers to entry that protected the earning potential of those who did succeed. Not every woman could become a high-end courtesan, which kept supply limited and prices high. Those who did achieve this level of success often earned enough to live like aristocrats, maintaining luxurious homes, expensive wardrobes, and staffs of servants. But perhaps the most ingenious aspect of Roman prostitution was how successful practitioners leveraged their earnings into diversified business portfolios. The smart money wasn't just in selling sex, it was in using sex work as a foundation for broader commercial enterprises. Many successful prostitutes became property developers, purchasing rundown buildings and converting them into upscale brothels or entertainment venues. They understood the market better than anyone and could identify profitable locations and design spaces that appealed to their target clientele. Some accumulated extensive real estate portfolios that generated passive income long after they retired from active sex work. Others moved into the hospitality industry, opening taverns, inns, or dining establishments that catered to the same wealthy clientele they had served as prostitutes. Their existing relationships and understanding of luxury service gave them significant advantages over competitors who lacked their specialized knowledge of high-end customer preferences. The entertainment industry offered another natural extension of their skills. Former courtesans often became theatrical producers, music instructors, or dance teachers. Some established academies where they trained the next generation of entertainers and sex workers, taking percentages of their students' earnings while building respectable businesses around education and cultural refinement. Money lending was surprisingly common among successful prostitutes. Their cash-based business generated substantial liquid capital, and their extensive social networks provided access to borrowers and investment opportunities. Some became informal bankers for other women in the sex trade, offering loans for startup costs, emergency expenses, or business expansion. The import-export trade also attracted entrepreneurial sex workers. Their international clientele provided valuable market intelligence about goods that were in demand in different parts of the empire. Some financed trading ventures or established supply chains for luxury items that they had first encountered through their wealthy customers. But beyond individual success stories, the Roman approach to regulating and taxing prostitution created an environment where the profession could flourish as legitimate commerce. The government didn't just tolerate sex work, they actively managed it through sophisticated administrative systems that treated it like any other significant industry. Prostitutes were required to register with local magistrates and obtain licenses that specified where and how they could operate. These licenses weren't just bureaucratic formalities, they were valuable business assets that could be bought, sold, or transferred. The licensing system created artificial scarcity that protected established operators from excessive competition, while ensuring quality standards that benefited both workers and customers. The tax structure was equally sophisticated. Prostitutes paid a percentage of their earnings to the state, but they also received substantial benefits in return. Licensed sex workers had access to legal protections, dispute resolution services, and even retirement benefits that weren't available to workers in other industries. The revenue generated by prostitution taxes was substantial enough to fund major public works projects. Some estimates suggest that sex work taxes paid for a significant portion of Rome's public bath construction and maintenance. This created a virtuous cycle where the state had strong incentives to protect and promote the industry that was funding civic improvements. Municipal authorities also invested in infrastructure that supported the sex trade. Purpose-built entertainment districts included not just brothels, but also restaurants, wine shops, perfume vendors, and clothing stores that catered to both sex workers and their clients. These integrated commercial zones created clusters of economic activity that benefited entire neighborhoods. The legal framework surrounding prostitution was remarkably progressive for its time. Sex workers could own property, enter into contracts, and seek legal recourse for disputes. They had the right to refuse clients, set their own prices, and change their terms of service. While they couldn't marry Roman citizens while actively working as prostitutes, they could retire from the profession and regain full legal status. Contract law was particularly important for high-end courtesans who often negotiated complex agreements with wealthy patrons. These contracts might specify exclusive arrangements, living accommodations, financial support, and even inheritance provisions. The courts enforced these agreements with the same rigor applied to any other commercial contract. Property rights were equally robust. Prostitutes could inherit wealth, purchase real estate, and bequeath their assets to heirs or business partners. Some accumulated enough wealth to establish charitable foundations or fund public monuments that enhanced their posthumous reputations. The professional associations that emerged around sex work provided additional support and advocacy for their members. These guilds negotiated with government authorities on behalf of the industry, provided legal assistance for individual disputes, and established standards and practices that protected both workers and customers. Guild membership also provided social benefits that helped address the isolation that could accompany sex work. Regular meetings, social events, and mutual aid societies created communities where sex workers could find friendship, support, and professional mentorship outside of their client relationships. Some guilds operated their own temples where members could worship deities associated with love, fertility, and prosperity. These religious activities provided spiritual comfort while also serving as networking opportunities where business relationships could be developed and maintained. The international scope of Roman prostitution created additional opportunities for ambitious sex workers. The empire's vast trade networks meant that successful courtesans could build reputations that extended across multiple provinces. Some essentially became traveling consultants, visiting major cities throughout the Mediterranean to serve wealthy clients who appreciated their specialized skills. These international careers required significant business acumen. Traveling courtesans needed to understand local customs, speak regional languages, and navigate different legal systems. They often maintained residences in multiple cities and employed local agents to manage their affairs when they were traveling. The cultural exchange facilitated by international sex work also contributed to the broader cosmopolitan character of Roman civilization. Courtesans who traveled extensively often became informal ambassadors of Roman culture while also bringing foreign influences back to the capital. Some became renowned for their knowledge of exotic customs, foods, or artistic styles that they had encountered in their travels. Technology and innovation within the profession also contributed to its economic success. Roman sex workers were early adopters of cosmetics, perfumes, and luxury textiles that enhanced their appeal to clients. Some invested in research and development of new products that they could then market to other women in the profession. The contraceptive and abortifacient knowledge possessed by experienced prostitutes was far more advanced than what was available to most women of the time. This medical expertise not only protected their own health and earning potential, but also created additional income streams as they provided these services to other women. Beauty and grooming techniques developed within the sex trade often influenced broader fashion trends throughout Roman society. Successful courtesans were style leaders whose choices in clothing, hairstyles, and accessories were copied by respectable women who admired their sophistication and glamour. The marketing and branding strategies employed by successful prostitutes were remarkably sophisticated for their time. The best courtesans cultivated distinctive personal images that set them apart from competitors. They might be known for their wit, their musical talents, their exotic background, or their connections to powerful political figures. Some courtesans employed what we might today call public relations strategies, arranging to be seen at important social events, sponsoring artistic performances, or commissioning portraits by renowned artists. These investments in personal publicity often paid substantial dividends in terms of increased demand and higher fees. The seasonal nature of Roman social life also created opportunities for strategic marketing. Successful sex workers timed their availability around major festivals, military triumphs, or political events when wealthy visitors would be present in large numbers. Some became associated with specific celebrations, building annual traditions that ensured steady, high-income periods. The economic impact of prostitution extended far beyond the women directly involved in the profession. The industry supported extensive networks of suppliers, service providers, and ancillary businesses that created employment opportunities throughout Roman society. Perfume makers, jewelry designers, silk merchants, wine sellers, musicians, and countless other professionals depended on the spending power of successful sex workers and their wealthy clientele. Some estimates suggest that the prostitution industry directly or indirectly supported as much as 10% of the urban economy in major Roman cities. This economic multiplier effect meant that successful sex workers weren't just improving their own circumstances, they were contributing to broader prosperity that benefited entire communities. Their spending power created demand for luxury goods and services that supported skilled craftsmen and artists throughout the empire. The charitable activities of wealthy former prostitutes also had significant social impact. Many used their accumulated wealth to fund public works, support struggling families, or patronize artistic and cultural activities. Some established schools or hospitals that served the broader community, transforming their commercial success into lasting social benefits. As we delve deeper into the daily realities of this remarkable profession, we'll explore how individual women navigated the challenges and opportunities of sex work in ancient Rome. We'll examine the specific strategies they used to build and maintain successful careers, the relationships they formed with clients and colleagues, and the ways they balanced the demands of their profession with their personal goals and aspirations. Because ultimately, the story of prostitution in ancient Rome is a story about human adaptability and entrepreneurship. These women, working within the constraints of their time and society, found ways to create prosperity, independence, and respect through intelligence, hard work, and strategic thinking. Their success challenges our assumptions about both ancient Rome and the nature of women's economic opportunities in pre-modern societies. The evidence suggests that for many women in ancient Rome, prostitution wasn't just the best available option, it was a genuine pathway to success that offered rewards unavailable through any other profession. Their stories remind us that human beings have always found ways to thrive, even in circumstances that seem limiting or oppressive to modern eyes. And as we'll see, the most successful of these women didn't just survive within the Roman system, they helped shape it, creating new forms of business, new social relationships, and new possibilities for female achievement that influenced Roman society for generations to come. But to truly understand how revolutionary these economic opportunities were, we need to examine the daily mechanics of how successful Roman sex workers actually built and sustained their careers. Because this wasn't just about showing up and hoping for the best. The most prosperous women in this profession operated like sophisticated business executives, employing strategies that would be familiar to any modern entrepreneur. Let's start with market positioning, because successful Roman prostitutes understood something that many modern businesses struggle with: the power of differentiation. In a competitive marketplace, simply offering the same services as everyone else was a recipe for mediocrity. The women who thrived were those who carved out unique niches that set them apart from the crowd. Some specialized in serving specific ethnic communities within Rome's diverse population. A courtesan who spoke fluent Greek might focus exclusively on wealthy merchants from the eastern provinces, commanding premium prices for her linguistic skills and cultural knowledge. Others might position themselves as experts in particular sexual practices or fantasy scenarios that appealed to specific customer segments. The most successful practitioners understood that they weren't just selling physical services, they were selling experiences. A top-tier courtesan might spend days preparing for a single client encounter, researching his interests, planning elaborate themed evenings, or arranging special entertainment that would create unforgettable memories. These women understood that extraordinary experiences justified extraordinary fees. Location strategy was equally crucial. While street-level prostitutes might work wherever they could find customers, successful, independent operators chose their locations with the same care that modern retailers select store sites. Proximity to wealthy neighborhoods, accessibility to major transportation routes, and the social atmosphere of different districts all factored into their business decisions. Some courtesans maintained multiple residences in different parts of the city, allowing them to serve diverse clienteles while also providing security and flexibility. Others invested in prime real estate near entertainment districts, turning their homes into destinations that clients would seek out specifically. The importance of personal branding in ancient Rome might surprise modern readers, but successful sex workers were master marketers who understood how to create and maintain compelling personal images. They weren't just selling themselves, they were selling carefully crafted personas that appealed to their target markets. Consider Lydia, a fictional but representative courtesan whose career trajectory illustrates these principles. Born to a poor family in the provinces, she arrived in Rome as a teenager with nothing but natural beauty and quick intelligence. Rather than immediately entering sex work, she spent 2 years working as a serving girl in an upscale tavern, observing the wealthy patrons and learning their preferences, mannerisms, and expectations. When she did begin working as a prostitute, Lydia positioned herself as an exotic provincial beauty who could provide escape from the sophisticated but sometimes sterile atmosphere of urban Roman society. She cultivated an image of innocent sensuality, learning folk songs from her homeland and decorating her modest apartment with rustic crafts that evoked pastoral simplicity. This positioning proved brilliant. Wealthy Romans, jaded by the complexities of city life, found her refreshing authenticity irresistible. Within 3 years, she had accumulated enough regular clients to move to a larger apartment near the campus Marcius, where she began hosting intimate dinner parties that combined provincial cuisine with sophisticated entertainment. By her late 20s, Lydia had evolved her brand again, transforming from the innocent country girl into a sophisticated cultural ambassador who could provide her clients with authentic experiences of provincial life without requiring them to actually leave the capital. She employed servants from her home region, imported specialty foods and wines, and even arranged for traditional musicians and storytellers to entertain at her gatherings. This evolution wasn't accidental. Lydia understood that successful branding required constant innovation and adaptation. As her original persona became more familiar, she developed new aspects of her identity that kept clients engaged and attracted new customers who were curious about her unique offerings. The networking aspects of the profession were equally sophisticated. Successful prostitutes didn't just serve individual clients, they became central nodes in complex social networks that included other sex workers, wealthy patrons, business associates, and cultural figures. These relationships provided access to information, opportunities, and protection that were crucial for long-term success. Professional associations among sex workers served multiple functions beyond just mutual support. They were intelligence networks where women shared information about clients, market conditions, and business opportunities. They were also collective bargaining organizations that could negotiate with authorities on issues like taxation, licensing, and working conditions. Some of these associations operated like modern trade organizations, establishing standards for pricing, service quality, and professional conduct. They provided training for newcomers, mentorship for career advancement, and even retirement planning for members who wanted to transition out of active sex work. The mentor-protege relationships within the profession were particularly important for career development. Experienced courtesans often took promising younger women under their wing, teaching them not just sexual techniques, but also business skills, social graces, and cultural knowledge that were essential for success at higher levels of the profession. These mentorship arrangements weren't purely altruistic. Established courtesans often received percentages of their proteges' earnings or gained access to younger clients who were attracted to their students. Some operated what were essentially finishing schools for aspiring sex workers, creating additional revenue streams while also ensuring a supply of well-trained competitors who would maintain industry standards. The seasonal rhythms of Roman social life created natural patterns that successful sex workers learned to exploit. The winter months, when wealthy families retreated to their urban residences, provided opportunities for intensive relationship building with established clients. Spring brought festivals and celebrations that attracted visitors with money to spend. Summer might see a temporary migration to seaside resorts where wealthy Romans escaped the heat. Understanding these patterns allowed successful prostitutes to plan their careers strategically. They might spend winters cultivating relationships with their most important clients, springs maximizing their earnings from festival crowds, and summers either following their wealthy patrons to resort areas or using the slower season for travel, education, or business development. The international opportunities available to successful Roman sex workers were remarkable for their time. The empire's vast trade networks meant that a courtesan with the right skills and connections could build a career that spanned multiple provinces. Some became essentially traveling consultants, maintaining residences in several major cities, and serving clients throughout the Mediterranean world. These international careers required substantial business acumen and cultural sophistication. A courtesan working across the empire needed to understand local customs, speak regional languages, and navigate different legal and social systems. She also needed the financial resources to maintain multiple establishments and the social connections to access elite circles in different cities. The rewards for successful international operations were substantial. A courtesan who could command high fees in Rome, Alexandria, Athens, and other major cities could accumulate wealth that rivaled that of major merchants or government officials. Some became so renowned that their names were known throughout the empire, and wealthy men would plan trips specifically to visit them. But international success also required careful attention to reputation management across multiple markets. A scandal in one city could damage a courtesan's reputation throughout her network, making discretion and professionalism essential qualities for anyone operating at this level. The retirement planning strategies employed by successful prostitutes were remarkably sophisticated. Unlike workers in most other professions, who might expect to work until they died, successful sex workers could potentially accumulate enough wealth to retire comfortably while still relatively young. But this required careful financial planning and strategic thinking about post-retirement careers. Many prostitutes used their earnings to purchase income-generating properties that would provide passive revenue streams after they stopped working. Others invested in businesses that they could manage personally, often drawing on skills and connections developed during their sex work careers. Some became moneylenders, using their accumulated capital to finance other people's ventures, while earning steady returns on their investments. The transition out of active sex work was often gradual rather than abrupt. A successful courtesan might reduce her client load while expanding her business activities, eventually reaching a point where sex work became a minor part of her overall income portfolio. This gradual transition helped maintain important relationships while building new sources of revenue and social respectability. Some former prostitutes became influential business leaders in their own right, operating enterprises that employed dozens of people and contributed significantly to local economies. Others used their wealth to gain social acceptance, arranging advantageous marriages for their children or purchasing their way into respectable social circles. The legal protections available to Roman prostitutes were crucial for enabling these long-term career strategies. Because sex work was recognized as legitimate commerce, prostitutes could engage in normal business activities without worrying that their profession would invalidate their commercial relationships. They could own property, enter contracts, and pursue legal remedies for disputes just like any other business operators. This legal recognition also extended to inheritance rights and family relationships. While active prostitutes faced some restrictions on marriage to Roman citizens, they could still form families, own property jointly with partners, and leave bequests to children or other heirs. Some accumulated enough wealth to establish family dynasties that lasted for generations. The tax obligations of prostitutes, while substantial, also provided them with legitimate standing in Roman society. Paying taxes meant being recognized as productive members of the community whose economic contributions were valued by the state. Some successful sex workers paid more in taxes than respected merchants or craftsmen, giving them a form of civic status that transcended the social stigma associated with their profession. The cultural impact of successful prostitutes extended far beyond their individual achievements. These women often became trendsetters and style leaders whose choices influenced fashion, entertainment, and social customs throughout Roman society. Their wealth and sophistication made them attractive associates for artists, writers, and cultural figures who might not have access to traditional aristocratic patronage. Some courtesans became significant art patrons, commissioning works from leading artists and architects. Others supported literary figures, funding the publication of works or providing venues for poetry readings and intellectual discussions. A few even became artists themselves, using their wealth and connections to pursue creative careers that would have been impossible without their sex work earnings. The educational activities of former prostitutes also had lasting cultural impact. Many established schools or academies that provided education not just for aspiring sex workers, but for other women seeking cultural refinement. These institutions often became important centers of learning that preserved and transmitted knowledge across generations. The business innovations developed within the Roman sex trade also influenced other industries. The customer service techniques, marketing strategies, and quality control measures pioneered by successful prostitutes were often adopted by other service businesses. The hospitality industry, in particular, benefited from innovations first developed in high-end brothels and courtesan establishments. The financial instruments and business practices created to serve the sex trade also had broader economic impact. The credit arrangements, insurance mechanisms, and investment strategies developed by and for prostitutes often became models for other industries. Some historians argue that certain modern banking practices can trace their origins to innovations first developed in the Roman sex trade. The real estate development projects undertaken by successful prostitutes also contributed to urban planning and architectural innovation. The specialized buildings designed for sex work often incorporated features that were later adopted in other commercial and residential construction. Some of the most luxurious private residences in Rome were originally built by or for successful courtesans. But perhaps most importantly, the success of women in Roman prostitution challenged conventional assumptions about female capabilities and potential. In a society that typically limited women's roles to domestic duties, these entrepreneurs demonstrated that women could be successful business leaders, property developers, and financial managers when given the opportunity. The evidence of their achievements was visible throughout Roman society. Former prostitutes who had become wealthy business owners, property developers, and cultural patrons provided proof that women could succeed in commercial endeavors when legal and social barriers were removed. Their success stories inspired other women to pursue economic independence and challenge traditional gender roles. The networks and institutions created by successful sex workers also provided infrastructure that supported other women's economic activities. The financial services, business connections, and mentorship opportunities developed within the profession often extended to women in other occupations, creating a broader ecosystem of female economic empowerment. As we continue exploring this fascinating world, we'll examine how these remarkable women navigated the personal challenges of their profession while building extraordinary careers. We'll look at the relationships they formed, the strategies they used to balance professional and personal goals, and the ways they created meaning and fulfillment within the constraints of their society. Because ultimately, the story of prostitution in ancient Rome isn't just about sex or even economics. It's about human resilience, creativity, and the eternal drive to create better lives regardless of the circumstances we're born into. These women, working within a system that offered them limited options, found ways to thrive that exceeded anything their society thought possible. Their achievements remind us that throughout history, people have found ways to turn disadvantages into advantages, to create opportunities where none seem to exist, and to build lives of dignity and prosperity even when the deck seemed stacked against them. The Roman prostitutes who became wealthy business leaders, cultural patrons, and respected community members didn't just succeed despite their circumstances, they succeeded because they understood how to work within their system while gradually transforming it. And as we'll see, their influence extended far beyond their own lifetimes, creating precedents and possibilities that would influence women's roles in Roman society for centuries to come. Their legacy challenges us to reconsider our assumptions about both the ancient world and the potential for human achievement under even the most constrained circumstances. The daily routines and professional practices of successful Roman sex workers reveal a level of sophistication that would be impressive in any era. These weren't women simply reacting to circumstances, they were strategic thinkers who approached their careers with the same systematic planning that characterized successful merchants, politicians, or military commanders. A typical day for an established courtesan might begin with several hours devoted to personal preparation and business planning. Physical maintenance was crucial, involving elaborate bathing rituals with imported oils and perfumes, careful attention to cosmetics and hairstyling, and selection of clothing and jewelry that would enhance her appeal to specific clients. But the preparation extended far beyond physical appearance. Successful courtesans spent considerable time staying informed about current events, cultural trends, and the personal interests of their clients. They might read letters from associates in other cities, review financial accounts, or study poetry or music that they could incorporate into their services. The afternoon hours were often devoted to business meetings and social networking. A successful courtesan might meet with property managers about her real estate investments, consult with financial advisors about new business opportunities, or negotiate contracts with suppliers of luxury goods. These weren't casual conversations, but serious business discussions that required sharp negotiating skills and detailed market knowledge. Evening entertainment was where the artistry of the profession truly shone. The most successful courtesans didn't just provide sexual services, they created theatrical experiences that transported their clients into carefully crafted fantasy worlds. These might involve elaborate costumes, specially prepared foods, music, and dancing, or role-playing scenarios that required considerable acting ability. The logistics of these productions were complex and expensive. A single evening's entertainment might require the services of musicians, dancers, cooks, servants, and decorators. The costs could be substantial, but the fees charged for these experiences often exceeded what most Romans earned in a year. Record keeping was another crucial aspect of professional sex work. Successful prostitutes maintained detailed accounts of their earnings, expenses, and investments. They tracked client preferences, payment schedules, and business opportunities with the same attention to detail that characterized any successful Roman commercial enterprise. These records weren't just for personal use. Tax obligations required accurate documentation of income, and business partnerships demanded transparent accounting. Some prostitutes employed professional scribes or accountants to manage their financial affairs, treating record-keeping as a specialized function that required expert attention. The security considerations of the profession also required careful planning and substantial investment. Successful courtesans often employed bodyguards, maintained secure residences with controlled access, and developed relationships with local authorities who could provide protection when needed. These weren't paranoid precautions, but reasonable business expenses in a world where valuable assets needed protection. The health and safety protocols developed by professional sex workers were often more sophisticated than those available to women in other occupations. Access to contraceptives, abortifacients, and medical care was crucial for maintaining earning capacity and personal well-being. Many successful prostitutes employed personal physicians or maintained relationships with medical professionals who could provide specialized care. The psychological demands of the profession required their own forms of professional development. Successful courtesans needed to be skilled actors, therapists, and social facilitators. They had to project confidence and sophistication while managing their own emotional needs and maintaining professional boundaries with clients who might become personally attached. Some developed what we might today call emotional intelligence to an extraordinary degree, becoming expert readers of human psychology who could adapt their personalities and services to meet the specific needs of different clients. This psychological sophistication often made them valuable confidants and advisors, whose influence extended far beyond their sexual services. The training and education that supported these careers was often extensive and ongoing. New entrants to the profession might spend months or even years learning the skills they would need to succeed. This wasn't just about sexual techniques, but about music, dancing, languages, literature, and social graces that were essential for serving educated, wealthy clients. Continuing education was equally important for career advancement. Successful courtesans might study new musical instruments, learn additional languages, or travel to other parts of the empire to observe different cultural practices that they could incorporate into their services. Some became genuinely learned women whose intellectual accomplishments rivaled those of male scholars. The quality control mechanisms within the profession helped maintain standards that protected both workers and clients. Professional associations established guidelines for pricing, service delivery, and ethical conduct. Courtesans who failed to meet these standards might find themselves excluded from the most lucrative opportunities or blacklisted by important clients. These quality standards also created natural career progression paths. Women who consistently delivered exceptional service could command higher fees, attract more prestigious clients, and gain access to exclusive opportunities that weren't available to mediocre performers. Excellence was rewarded with advancement, just as in any other professional field. The marketing and promotion strategies employed by successful prostitutes were remarkably sophisticated for their time. The best courtesans understood that reputation was their most valuable asset and invested heavily in building and maintaining their public images. This might involve sponsoring public events, commissioning artistic works, or cultivating relationships with influential cultural figures. Word-of-mouth marketing was particularly important in a profession where direct advertising was limited. Satisfied clients became ambassadors who recommended their favorite courtesans to friends and associates. Building a network of enthusiastic advocates was often more valuable than any formal marketing campaign. The seasonal and cyclical nature of Roman social life created natural rhythms that successful sex workers learned to exploit. Major festivals, military triumphs, and political events brought wealthy visitors to the city, creating temporary spikes in demand that could be extremely lucrative for well-positioned courtesans. Understanding these patterns allowed strategic career planning. A courtesan might spend months preparing for a major festival, arranging special accommodations, planning unique entertainment, and building anticipation among potential clients. The earnings from a few peak periods could often support a comfortable lifestyle throughout the year. The international dimensions of the profession created opportunities for cultural exchange and personal enrichment that were rare for women of any social class. Courtesans who worked with foreign clients often became knowledgeable about different cultures, languages, and customs. Some became informal cultural ambassadors who facilitated understanding between different parts of the empire. This cultural sophistication often enhanced their appeal to Roman clients who valued cosmopolitan experiences. A courtesan who could provide authentic insights into Greek philosophy, Egyptian religious practices, or Germanic tribal customs offered something unique that justified premium pricing. The investment strategies employed by successful prostitutes demonstrated remarkable financial sophistication. Rather than simply spending their earnings on personal luxuries, many developed diversified portfolios that included real estate, business ventures, and financial instruments. Some became significant investors whose capital helped fund major commercial and infrastructure projects. The risk management approaches used by these women were equally impressive. They understood that their earning potential was tied to factors beyond their control, including age, health, and changing market conditions. Successful practitioners developed multiple income streams and built substantial reserves that could sustain them through difficult periods. The legacy planning undertaken by wealthy former prostitutes often involved complex arrangements designed to preserve their wealth across generations while also enhancing their posthumous reputations. Some established charitable foundations, endowed public works, or created institutions that would perpetuate their memory in positive ways. These legacy projects often had significant social impact. Former prostitutes who became philanthropists supported education, healthcare, and cultural activities that benefited entire communities. Their contributions helped establish precedents for female philanthropy that influenced social customs for generations. The technological innovations associated with Roman sex work also had broader applications. Improvements in cosmetics, perfumes, textiles, and medical procedures often originated in the sex trade before being adopted by mainstream society. The profession's emphasis on luxury and innovation created incentives for developing new products and services. The architectural and design innovations pioneered in high-end brothels and courtesan residences also influenced broader construction practices. Features like improved lighting, ventilation, acoustic design, and decorative arts often appeared first in sex work venues before being adopted in other buildings. As we prepare to examine the personal stories and individual achievements of specific women who succeeded in this remarkable profession, it's important to remember that we're not looking at isolated cases or exceptional outliers. The opportunities and achievements we've been discussing were available to thousands of women throughout the Roman Empire who chose sex work as their path to prosperity and independence. Their collective success created a template for female entrepreneurship that challenged conventional gender roles and demonstrated possibilities that their society had never imagined. These women didn't just succeed within their system, they helped transform it, creating new forms of economic activity, new social relationships, and new possibilities for female achievement. The evidence of their impact is written into the very fabric of Roman civilization, visible in the buildings they constructed, the businesses they founded, the cultural innovations they sponsored, and the legal precedents they established. Their legacy reminds us that throughout history, determined individuals have found ways to transcend the limitations of their circumstances and create extraordinary lives for themselves and their families. And as we'll see in the stories of individual women who turned sex work into stepping stones for remarkable careers, the best of these practitioners didn't just achieve personal success, they became agents of broader social change whose influence extended far beyond their own lifetimes. The stories of individual women who achieved extraordinary success through prostitution in ancient Rome read like the most ambitious entrepreneurial narratives of any era. These weren't just women who survived within a difficult system, they were innovators who fundamentally reimagined what was possible for their gender in the ancient world. Take the case of Volumnia Cytheris, a freed woman who began her career as an actress and courtesan in the late Republic. Born into slavery, she might have expected to spend her life as a domestic servant or laborer, invisible to history and powerless to change her circumstances. Instead, she leveraged her intelligence and charm to become one of the most influential women of her generation. Cytheris didn't just serve wealthy clients, she cultivated relationships with some of the most powerful men in Rome. Mark Antony became so infatuated with her that he brought her on military campaigns, treating her like a queen while his soldiers looked on in amazement. This wasn't just a sexual relationship, it was a political partnership that gave Cytheris access to information and influence that she used to build her own power base. But Cytheris was too smart to rely entirely on Antony's favor. While maintaining their relationship, she also developed connections with poets, philosophers, and other cultural figures who helped establish her reputation as a sophisticated patron of the arts. She invested her earnings in property throughout the city and used her connections to secure favorable business deals that multiplied her wealth. When Antony's political fortunes declined, Cytheris had already positioned herself for independence. She retired from active sex work but continued to operate as a cultural influencer and business leader. Her salon became a gathering place for intellectuals and artists who valued her judgment and sought her patronage. She lived comfortably for decades, respected and admired long after her original profession had become a distant memory. What made Cytheris exceptional wasn't just her beauty or sexual skills, but her strategic thinking and business acumen. She understood that success in her profession required more than just satisfying individual clients. It required building a brand and a network that could sustain her throughout her life. She treated her career like a complex business venture rather than a series of individual transactions. The financial records preserved from Pompeii reveal another fascinating success story, that of a woman known only as Flora in the surviving documents. Archaeological evidence suggests she began as a street-level prostitute working near the gladiator barracks, serving clients for just a few sestertii per encounter. But Flora had ambitions that extended far beyond survival. Within 5 years, she had saved enough money to rent a small apartment where she could work independently. This allowed her to be more selective about clients and charge higher fees for the privacy and comfort she could provide. But Flora's real innovation was recognizing the business potential of the gladiator games themselves. She began offering specialized services during major gladiatorial events, positioning herself as an expert in serving the warriors who fought in the arena. This wasn't just about sexual services, but about understanding the psychological needs of men who faced death for entertainment. Flora became known for her ability to provide comfort and companionship that helped gladiators manage the stress and trauma of their profession. This specialization proved extraordinarily lucrative. Successful gladiators earned substantial prize money and were willing to pay premium prices for Flora's unique services. She also attracted wealthy spectators who were excited by association with the dangerous glamour of the arena. Within a decade, Flora had accumulated enough wealth to purchase several properties near the amphitheater. But Flora's business model was even more sophisticated than it initially appeared. She used her connections in the gladiator world to develop what was essentially an entertainment and hospitality empire. She opened taverns that catered to arena performers and spectators, operated lodging houses for visiting dignitaries, and even invested in gladiator training schools. Her intimate knowledge of the gladiatorial world gave her competitive advantages that outsiders couldn't match. She understood which fighters were likely to succeed, which events would draw the largest crowds, and what services would be most in demand during different types of competitions. This insider knowledge allowed her to make investment decisions that consistently generated substantial returns. By the time Vesuvius erupted and preserved her story in ash, Flora had become one of the wealthiest business owners in Pompeii. Her success had elevated her from street prostitution to legitimate business leadership, demonstrating how sex work could serve as a foundation for much broader commercial achievements. The career of Hispala Phaecaenia provides another compelling example of how prostitution could lead to social and political influence that extended far beyond individual economic success. Hispala began as a slave prostitute, but eventually gained her freedom and established herself as an independent courtesan serving wealthy Roman citizens. Her breakthrough came when she became involved in exposing the Bacchanalia conspiracy, a political scandal that threatened the stability of the Roman state. Hispala's relationship with a young nobleman gave her access to information about secret religious rites that were allegedly being used to plot against the government. Her decision to report this information to the authorities required considerable courage, as it meant betraying clients and potentially facing retaliation from powerful enemies. But Hispala's gamble paid off spectacularly. The Roman Senate was so grateful for her loyalty that they granted her unprecedented honors and rewards. She received a substantial monetary award, was granted special legal protections, and was even allowed to marry into the citizen class despite her background as a former slave and prostitute. More importantly, Hispala's actions established a precedent for how women could use information and relationships developed through sex work to influence major political events. She demonstrated that courtesans weren't just passive objects of male desire, but could be active agents who shaped the course of history through their intelligence and courage. The ripple effects of Hispala's success extended throughout the profession. Other courtesans began to understand that their access to powerful men could be leveraged for purposes beyond immediate financial gain. Some became informal intelligence networks, others served as intermediaries in political negotiations, and a few even became trusted advisors to major political figures. This evolution of the profession from simple service provision to political influence represented a fundamental transformation in how Roman society understood women's capabilities. Courtesans who had started their careers selling sexual services ended up as power brokers who could affect the destinies of nations. The international career of Lais of Corinth, though technically Greek rather than Roman, illustrates how successful sex workers could achieve influence that transcended national boundaries. Lais was so renowned for her beauty and sophistication that wealthy Romans would travel to Greece specifically to visit her, paying fees that exceeded the annual incomes of most citizens. But Lais wasn't content with serving individual clients, no matter how wealthy or important they might be. She used her earnings and reputation to establish what was essentially a luxury resort that catered to the Roman elite. Her compound included gardens, baths, dining facilities, and entertainment venues that provided complete vacation experiences for her guests. This business model proved so successful that Lais was able to charge what amounted to membership fees for access to her facilities. Wealthy Romans competed for invitations to her exclusive gatherings, where they could network with other elite individuals while enjoying the finest food, wine, and entertainment available anywhere in the Mediterranean. Laius's influence extended beyond just hospitality and entertainment. Her opinions on art, literature, and philosophy were widely respected, and her endorsements could make or break new cultural trends. Artists competed for her patronage, knowing that her approval could launch successful careers. Politicians sought her advice on matters ranging from economic policy to military strategy. When Lais eventually retired from active sex work, she had accumulated enough wealth to live like a queen. But more importantly, she had established a template for how exceptional women could use their talents to build influence that rivaled that of traditional political and economic leaders. Her legacy inspired other courtesans to think beyond individual transactions and consider how they might reshape entire industries or cultural movements. The story of Chelidon demonstrates how former prostitutes could use their accumulated wealth and connections to become significant players in Roman politics and business. Chelidon began her career as a courtesan serving wealthy merchants and government officials. But unlike many of her contemporaries, she paid careful attention to the political and economic information she gathered from her clients. Over time, Chelidon began to understand patterns in Roman politics and commerce that weren't apparent to casual observers. She realized that her unique position gave her access to information from multiple competing factions, allowing her to see the bigger picture more clearly than participants who were embedded within single political or commercial networks. Chelidon began using this information advantage to make strategic investments and political predictions that proved remarkably accurate. Her success attracted attention from major political figures who began consulting her for advice on everything from military campaigns to economic policy. She essentially became an informal intelligence analyst whose insights were valued by some of the most powerful people in the empire. As her reputation for political acumen grew, Chelidon was able to transition away from sex work entirely while maintaining her influence and income. She established what was essentially a consulting business, providing analysis and advice to political leaders, military commanders, and major merchants. Her fees for these services often exceeded what she had earned as a courtesan, demonstrating how sex work could serve as a launching pad for entirely different careers. The wealth and influence that Celadon accumulated through her political consulting allowed her to become a significant patron of public works and cultural activities. She funded the construction of public buildings, sponsored artistic performances, and supported educational institutions. Her philanthropic activities helped establish her legacy as a benefactor of Roman society, rather than simply a former sex worker. These individual success stories weren't isolated anomalies, but examples of patterns that were repeated throughout the Roman world. The combination of legal protections, economic opportunities, and social mobility available through prostitution created conditions where ambitious and intelligent women could achieve extraordinary success. The documented cases represent only a fraction of the women who used sex work as a pathway to prosperity and influence. Many more undoubtedly achieved significant success without leaving detailed historical records. The archaeological evidence from Pompeii alone suggests that dozens of former prostitutes became property owners and business leaders in that single city. The collective impact of these success stories was profound. They demonstrated that women were capable of sophisticated business thinking, political analysis, and cultural leadership when given the opportunity. They challenged assumptions about female capabilities and created precedents for women's participation in public life that influenced Roman society for generations. The business innovations pioneered by successful prostitutes also had lasting impact on Roman commerce and culture. The hospitality industry, entertainment sector, and luxury goods markets all benefited from techniques and standards first developed in the sex trade. Some historians argue that certain aspects of modern service industries can trace their origins to innovations first implemented by Roman courtesans. The philanthropic activities of wealthy former prostitutes also contributed to the development of Roman civic culture. Their funding of public works, educational institutions, and cultural activities helped establish traditions of private philanthropy that became important features of Roman society. Some of the most beautiful buildings and cultural institutions in the empire were built with money earned through sex work. The legal precedents established through the business activities of prostitutes also had broader implications for women's rights and commercial law. The contracts, property transactions, and dispute resolutions involving sex workers helped clarify legal principles that applied to all women engaged in commercial activities. Perhaps most importantly, the success of women in Roman prostitution provided proof that gender wasn't an insurmountable barrier to achievement in business, politics, or culture. While respectable women faced numerous legal and social restrictions, prostitutes demonstrated that women could succeed as entrepreneurs, investors, and leaders when artificial barriers were removed. The evidence suggests that many of the most successful Roman prostitutes didn't view their profession as degrading or limiting, but as liberating and empowering. They found in sex work opportunities for creativity, financial independence, and social influence that simply weren't available through other means. Their success stories challenge modern assumptions about both ancient Rome and the nature of sex work itself. The networks and institutions created by successful prostitutes also provided infrastructure that supported other women's economic activities. The financial services, business connections, and mentorship opportunities developed within the profession often extended to women in other occupations, creating a broader ecosystem of female economic empowerment. The cultural influence of successful courtesans extended far beyond their immediate profession. They became style leaders, cultural critics, and artistic patrons whose preferences shaped broader social trends. Their salons and entertainment venues became important centers of intellectual and cultural activity that contributed to the vibrancy of Roman civilization. The international connections developed by traveling courtesans also contributed to cultural exchange and communication throughout the empire. These women often served as informal ambassadors who facilitated understanding between different regions and peoples. Their cosmopolitan perspectives and cultural sophistication made them valuable bridges between diverse communities. The educational institutions established by wealthy former prostitutes also had lasting impact on Roman society. Some of the schools and academies they founded continued operating for generations, providing education and cultural refinement to thousands of women who might otherwise have had limited access to learning. The artistic and literary works commissioned by successful prostitutes also enriched Roman culture. Many of the most beautiful sculptures, paintings, and architectural features in Roman cities were created with funding from women who had earned their wealth through sex work. Their patronage helped support artists and craftsmen throughout the empire. The business archives and financial records left by successful prostitutes also provide valuable insights into Roman economic practices and commercial relationships. These documents reveal sophisticated understanding of investment strategies, risk management, and business planning that demonstrates the high level of commercial sophistication achieved by women in this profession. The medical and health innovations developed within the sex trade also had broader applications for women's health care throughout Roman society. The contraceptive techniques, hygiene practices, and medical treatments pioneered by prostitutes often became available to other women, improving health outcomes across different social classes. The security and protection arrangements developed by successful courtesans also influenced broader practices around personal safety and property protection. The bodyguard services, secure facilities, and legal protections they employed often became models for other businesses and individuals seeking to protect valuable assets. As we examine these remarkable stories of individual achievement and collective impact, it becomes clear that prostitution in ancient Rome was far more than just a service industry. It was a pathway to empowerment that enabled thousands of women to transcend the limitations of their birth circumstances and create lives of prosperity, influence, and respect. These women didn't just succeed despite the constraints of their society, they helped transform those constraints, creating new possibilities for female achievement that influenced Roman civilization for centuries. Their legacy challenges us to reconsider our assumptions about both the ancient world and the potential for human achievement under even the most limiting circumstances. The success stories we've examined represent just a fraction of the women who found in prostitution a pathway to better lives. For every documented case of extraordinary achievement, there were undoubtedly dozens of others who used sex work to achieve more modest but still significant improvements in their circumstances and opportunities. The collective impact of these thousands of individual success stories was to demonstrate that women possessed capabilities and potential that their society had never fully recognized or utilized. The achievements of successful prostitutes provided proof that gender-based limitations on women's roles were artificial constraints rather than natural laws. This evidence of female capability and achievement helped lay the groundwork for gradual changes in attitudes toward women's roles in Roman society. While full equality remained centuries away, the success of women in prostitution helped establish precedents and possibilities that would influence future generations of women seeking to expand their opportunities and influence. The institutions, networks, and precedents created by successful Roman prostitutes provided infrastructure that supported women's advancement in many different fields. Their legacy extended far beyond their own profession, creating foundations for female entrepreneurship, cultural leadership, and social influence that benefited women throughout Roman society. As we continue exploring this fascinating world, we'll examine how these remarkable achievements were sustained and transmitted across generations, how they influenced broader social changes, and what lessons they might offer for understanding women's potential in any historical context. The influence of these success stories rippled through Roman society in ways that extended far beyond individual achievement. When a former prostitute like Volumnia Cytheris could sit in the same theater box as senators' wives, when Flora's business empire employed hundreds of workers, when Celadon's political advice shaped imperial policy, it sent a powerful message about what women could accomplish when artificial barriers were removed. But perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of these achievements was how they challenged the fundamental assumptions about women's nature and capabilities that underpinned Roman patriarchal society. The traditional Roman view held that women were naturally suited only for domestic roles, that they lacked the intellectual capacity for complex business decisions, and that their emotional nature made them unsuitable for positions of real responsibility. The success of women in prostitution systematically demolished each of these assumptions. Here were women managing complex financial portfolios, negotiating sophisticated business deals, and exercising political influence that rivaled that of male senators and merchants. Their achievements provided undeniable proof that gender-based limitations were social constructs rather than biological inevitabilities. This wasn't lost on contemporary observers. The poet Ovid, writing during the height of the empire, noted with admiration how certain courtesans had achieved wealth and influence that exceeded that of women born into the highest social ranks. The historian Tacitus documented cases where former prostitutes became trusted advisors to provincial governors. Their counsel valued precisely because their unconventional backgrounds gave them perspectives unavailable to traditional elite women. Even more remarkably, some male writers began to argue that the very experiences that made women successful in prostitution, their need to understand human psychology, manage complex relationships, and operate independently in competitive markets, actually made them superior to conventional wives in many practical respects. This was revolutionary thinking in a society that had always justified women's subordination by claiming their natural inferiority. The economic model developed by successful Roman prostitutes also influenced how other women thought about their own possibilities. The concept of personal branding, strategic networking, and diversified income streams that courtesans pioneered began to appear in other female-dominated professions. Women operating taverns, managing textile workshops, or running import businesses started adopting techniques first developed in the sex trade. This cross-pollination of business practices helped elevate the sophistication and profitability of women's work across multiple industries. The financial planning strategies, customer service innovations, and marketing techniques pioneered by prostitutes became standard practices that enabled women in various fields to achieve greater success and independence. The educational institutions established by wealthy former prostitutes also had profound long-term impact on Roman society. These weren't just finishing schools for aspiring courtesans, but academies that provided comprehensive education in literature, music, philosophy, and practical skills. Many respectable families began sending their daughters to these institutions, recognizing that they offered educational opportunities unavailable elsewhere. This created an interesting paradox where schools founded by former prostitutes became prestigious institutions that enhanced rather than damaged their students' social standing. The quality of education provided was so superior to alternatives available to women that social prejudice gave way to practical considerations about preparing daughters for successful lives. The medical and health innovations developed within the sex trade also had revolutionary implications for women's lives throughout Roman society. The contraceptive knowledge, hygiene practices, and healthcare techniques pioneered by prostitutes gradually spread to other women, giving them greater control over their reproductive lives and overall health outcomes. This medical knowledge was particularly valuable because it was practical and effective, developed through direct experience rather than theoretical speculation. The contraceptive methods used by prostitutes were often more reliable than those available through traditional medical sources, and their understanding of women's health issues was frequently more sophisticated than that of male physicians. The legal precedents established through the business activities of prostitutes also had far-reaching implications for women's rights more generally. The contracts they negotiated, the property they owned, and the legal disputes they resolved helped clarify and expand the legal framework governing women's commercial activities throughout the empire. These precedents were particularly important because they demonstrated that women could handle complex legal and financial responsibilities when given the opportunity. Courts that initially dealt with prostitutes' business disputes gradually became more willing to recognize similar rights and capabilities in other women engaged in commercial activities. The cultural influence of successful courtesans also helped reshape Roman attitudes toward female intelligence and capability. Their patronage of arts and literature, their sophisticated salons, and their intellectual accomplishments gradually changed how society viewed women's potential contributions to cultural and intellectual life. Some of the most important philosophical and literary works of the period were created with support from former prostitutes who had become cultural patrons. Their funding enabled artists and writers to pursue projects that might not have been commercially viable, contributing to the flowering of Roman culture during the imperial period. The international networks developed by traveling courtesans also facilitated cultural exchange and communication throughout the empire in ways that had lasting historical significance. These women often served as informal ambassadors who helped maintain connections between different regions and peoples, contributing to the cosmopolitan character that defined Roman civilization at its height. Their understanding of different cultures, languages, and customs made them valuable intermediaries in diplomatic and commercial relationships. Some historians argue that the cultural unity that held the diverse Roman Empire together was partly maintained through informal networks that included successful prostitutes who had developed international connections. The technological and artistic innovations sponsored by wealthy sex workers also contributed to broader advances in Roman civilization. The architectural features developed for luxury brothels influenced residential construction throughout the empire. The cosmetic and textile innovations created for courtesans eventually became available to women of all social classes. The business practices and organizational structures developed within the sex trade also influenced other industries. The customer service standards, quality control measures, and professional development programs pioneered by successful prostitutes became models that were adopted by businesses throughout the Roman world. But perhaps the most significant long-term impact of these achievements was how they expanded the realm of possibility for future generations of women. The success stories of Roman prostitutes provided proof that women could excel in business, politics, and cultural leadership when given appropriate opportunities. This evidence of female capability created pressure for gradual expansion of women's roles in other areas of Roman society. While change was slow and often resisted, the undeniable achievements of women in prostitution made it increasingly difficult to justify absolute gender-based exclusions from other fields of endeavor. The mentorship networks and professional associations created by successful prostitutes also provided infrastructure that supported women's advancement in various fields. The business connections, financial resources, and knowledge-sharing systems they developed often extended beyond the sex trade to support women in other occupations. These networks became particularly important for women who wanted to transition from prostitution into other careers. The business skills, financial resources, and social connections developed through sex work often provided the foundation for success in entirely different fields, from property development to cultural patronage to political influence. The retirement and legacy planning strategies developed by successful prostitutes also created new models for how women could build long-term security and social respectability. Their approaches to wealth accumulation, investment diversification, and philanthropic giving became templates that other women could adapt to their own circumstances. The charitable activities of wealthy former prostitutes also helped establish new traditions of female philanthropy that influenced Roman civic culture for generations. Their funding of public works, educational institutions, and cultural activities demonstrated that women could be significant contributors to community welfare and social development. The religious and spiritual dimensions of the profession also had complex implications for Roman society. Some prostitutes became associated with fertility cults and goddess worship that provided alternative spiritual frameworks for women seeking religious expression outside traditional patriarchal structures. These religious activities often provided additional venues for female leadership and influence. Some former prostitutes became priestesses or religious leaders whose spiritual authority complemented their economic and social achievements, creating new models for women's roles in religious life. The artistic and literary representations of successful prostitutes also influenced how Roman culture understood female agency and achievement. The poems, sculptures, and paintings that celebrated accomplished courtesans helped normalize the idea that women could be subjects worthy of artistic attention for their accomplishments rather than just their beauty. This cultural shift was significant because it expanded the range of female roles and achievements that society considered worthy of recognition and celebration. The artistic legacy of successful prostitutes helped create new archetypes of female success that influenced literature and art for centuries. The economic impact of the prostitution industry also had broader implications for Roman fiscal policy and urban development. The substantial tax revenues generated by sex work helped fund public infrastructure and services that benefited entire communities. The business activities of successful prostitutes contributed to economic growth and urban prosperity throughout the empire. The real estate development and construction projects undertaken by wealthy prostitutes also contributed to urban planning and architectural innovation. Some of the most impressive residential and commercial buildings in Roman cities were built with capital accumulated through sex work, contributing to the physical grandeur that characterized imperial Roman civilization. The diplomatic and intelligence activities of some courtesans also had strategic importance for Roman foreign policy and military operations. Their international connections and cultural knowledge sometimes provided valuable information that influenced major political and military decisions. The educational and cultural exchanges facilitated by traveling prostitutes also contributed to the spread of Roman values and practices throughout the empire. Their role as informal cultural ambassadors helped maintain the connections and shared identity that held the diverse Roman world together. As we examine the full scope of these achievements and their lasting impact, it becomes clear that the success of women in Roman prostitution represented far more than individual economic advancement. It was a systematic challenge to patriarchal assumptions about women's capabilities that helped lay the groundwork for gradual but significant changes in gender roles throughout Roman society. The evidence of what women could accomplish when legal and social barriers were removed provided a powerful argument for expanding female opportunities in other areas. While full equality remained centuries away, the achievements of Roman prostitutes helped establish precedents and possibilities that influenced women's roles for generations to come. The institutions, networks, and practices they created provided infrastructure that supported women's advancement across multiple fields. Their business innovations, educational institutions, and philanthropic activities created foundations for female empowerment that extended far beyond their own profession. Their success stories also provided inspiration and practical guidance for other women seeking to improve their circumstances. The strategies they developed for building wealth, managing businesses, and achieving social respectability became templates that could be adapted to different professions and social contexts. The cultural and intellectual contributions of successful prostitutes also enriched Roman civilization in ways that benefited all members of society. Their patronage of arts and literature, their support for education and public works, and their contributions to cultural exchange helped create the sophisticated, cosmopolitan civilization that defined Rome at its height. Perhaps most importantly, their achievements demonstrated that human potential isn't limited by the circumstances of birth or the prejudices of society. These women, starting from positions of disadvantage in a patriarchal world, found ways to create lives of prosperity, influence, and respect that exceeded what their society thought possible for their gender. Their legacy reminds us that throughout history, determined individuals have found ways to transcend limitations and create extraordinary lives for themselves and their families. The Roman prostitutes who became wealthy business leaders, cultural patrons, and political influencers didn't just succeed despite their circumstances, they transformed those circumstances into advantages. Their stories challenge us to reconsider our assumptions about historical women's lives and capabilities. They demonstrate that even in societies we consider oppressive, creative, and determined individuals found ways to carve out spaces of freedom and opportunity that enabled remarkable achievements. The evidence of their success also provides valuable insights into the conditions that enable human flourishing. When legal protections, economic opportunities, and social mobility were available, these women achieved extraordinary things. Their achievements suggest that talent and determination can overcome significant obstacles when supported by appropriate institutional frameworks. As we conclude our exploration of this fascinating world, we're left with a profound appreciation for the resilience, creativity, and entrepreneurial spirit of these remarkable women. They found in prostitution not just a means of survival, but a pathway to prosperity, influence, and social contribution that was unmatched by any other profession available to women of their time. Their legacy extends far beyond their own achievements to encompass the broader transformation of gender roles, economic opportunities, and social possibilities that their success helped create. They proved that women could excel in business, politics, and cultural leadership when given appropriate opportunities, laying groundwork for future generations of women seeking to expand their roles and influence. The world they created, with its networks of female entrepreneurship, its institutions of education and cultural refinement, and its models of economic independence and social mobility, provided a foundation for women's advancement that influenced Roman society for centuries. Their achievements remind us that progress often comes through the accumulated efforts of individuals who refuse to accept limitations and instead find ways to create better lives for themselves and others. In examining why prostitution was often the best option available to women in ancient Rome, we've discovered a story that's ultimately about human potential, social innovation, and the eternal drive for freedom and prosperity. These women didn't just survive within their system, they transformed it, creating new possibilities that continue to inspire us today. Their stories reveal something profound about human nature itself, the way people have always found paths to dignity and purpose, even within systems that seem designed to limit them. When we strip away our modern assumptions and really examine the evidence, we see that these women weren't victims of their circumstances, but architects of their own destinies. The transformation we've witnessed throughout this exploration is remarkable. We began by challenging the stereotype of the downtrodden ancient prostitute, that Hollywood image of desperation and exploitation. Instead, we've uncovered a complex world where intelligent, ambitious women built careers that would be impressive in any era. What emerges is a picture of systematic female entrepreneurship on a scale that most people today would find shocking. These weren't isolated success stories, but patterns repeated throughout the empire. Evidence of an entire alternative economy where women's talents could flourish in ways that traditional society simply didn't allow. The business sophistication alone should give us pause. When Flora could analyze gladiatorial markets and build entertainment empires, when Cytheris could navigate the highest levels of Roman politics, when countless unnamed women transformed themselves from street workers into property moguls, we're looking at capabilities that their society officially claimed women didn't possess. But perhaps what's most striking is how these achievements were hiding in plain sight. Roman writers documented these successes, tax records preserved their wealth, archaeological evidence reveals their properties and businesses. Yet somehow our modern understanding of ancient women's lives managed to overlook this entire dimension of female achievement. The legal framework that made this possible tells us something important about Roman pragmatism versus our own moral frameworks. Where we might see degradation, Romans saw commerce. Where we project shame and stigma, they created taxation systems and professional regulations. Their approach wasn't perfect, but it created space for opportunities that simply didn't exist for women anywhere else in their society. The ripple effects extended far beyond individual success stories. When former prostitutes became respected business leaders, when their children married into established families, when their philanthropy funded public works that entire communities used and admired, the boundaries of what was considered possible for women gradually expanded. These weren't just economic achievements, but social revolutions carried out one career at a time. Each successful transition from sex work to respectable business ownership challenged assumptions about women's capabilities. Each wealthy courtesan who became a cultural patron demonstrated female sophistication that rivaled any male peer. The educational impact deserves special recognition. The schools and academies established by successful prostitutes often provided better education for women than anything available through traditional channels. Wealthy families began sending their daughters to institutions founded by former sex workers because the quality of instruction was simply superior. This created a fascinating irony where the very profession that mainstream society considered degrading produced educational opportunities that enhanced other women's social standing. The practical knowledge, business skills, and cultural sophistication developed within the sex trade became assets that benefited women across social boundaries. The international dimensions we've explored also reveal how these women became informal ambassadors of Roman culture while simultaneously bringing foreign influences back to the capital. Their cosmopolitan perspectives and cultural fluency made them bridges between different parts of the empire, contributing to the cultural unity that held the Roman world together. The medical and health innovations they pioneered had lasting impact on women's lives throughout society. The contraceptive knowledge, hygiene practices, and healthcare techniques developed within the profession gradually spread to other women, giving them greater control over their reproductive lives and overall well-being. Their financial innovations influenced broader Roman commercial practices. The customer service standards, quality control measures, and business networking strategies they developed became models adopted by other industries. Some historians argue that certain aspects of modern service businesses can trace their origins to techniques first perfected in Roman brothels and courtesan establishments. The artistic and cultural patronage of successful prostitutes also enriched Roman civilization in ways that benefited all citizens. The buildings they funded, the artists they supported, the cultural institutions they established contributed to the sophisticated urban environment that defined imperial Rome at its height. But beyond all these specific contributions, what these women really achieved was a fundamental expansion of human possibility. In a world that insisted women were naturally inferior, naturally suited only for domestic roles, naturally incapable of complex thinking or independent action, they provided living proof that these limitations were artificial constructs rather than biological realities. The precedents they established influenced Roman society for generations. While full equality remained centuries away, their achievements made it increasingly difficult to justify absolute gender-based exclusions from commerce, culture, and even politics. They created cracks in the patriarchal system that future generations of women could widen. Their success also provided practical infrastructure that supported other women's advancement. The business networks, financial resources, and professional associations they created often extended beyond the sex trade to help women in various fields achieve greater independence and success. The retirement and legacy planning strategies they developed became templates for how women could build long-term security and social respectability. Their approaches to wealth accumulation, property investment, and philanthropic giving showed other women pathways to financial independence that didn't depend on male family members. The mentorship relationships within the profession created knowledge transfer systems that preserved and transmitted business expertise across generations. The skills and strategies developed by successful practitioners were passed down to newcomers, creating a kind of informal business education that wasn't available elsewhere for women. The quality standards and professional ethics they established helped legitimize sex work as a form of commerce rather than simple exploitation. The guild systems, dispute resolution mechanisms, and industry standards they created provided protections and opportunities that made the profession more attractive to ambitious women seeking economic advancement. As we reflect on this remarkable world, we're forced to confront some uncomfortable questions about our own assumptions. If prostitution in ancient Rome could provide pathways to wealth, influence, and respectability that were unavailable through any other means, what does that tell us about the alternatives available to women in that society? The answer is both sobering and illuminating. For most women in the Roman world, the traditional paths offered little prospect for genuine independence or significant achievement. Marriage meant legal subordination to a husband chosen by family considerations rather than personal preference. Most female occupations provided subsistence wages and no opportunity for advancement. Against this background, prostitution's offer of economic independence, social mobility, and personal autonomy becomes comprehensible in ways that our modern moral frameworks might initially resist. These women weren't choosing degradation over respectability, they were choosing opportunity over limitation, agency over dependence, possibility over resignation. Their choices challenge us to think more carefully about how we evaluate historical women's lives. Rather than imposing our contemporary values on ancient circumstances, we need to understand the actual options available and the rational calculations that guided women's decisions within their own social and economic contexts. The evidence suggests that many successful Roman prostitutes viewed their profession not as a source of shame, but as a source of pride. They had built businesses, accumulated wealth, achieved social influence, and created better lives for themselves and their families through their own intelligence and effort. By the standards of their time, these were remarkable accomplishments. Their stories also remind us that progress often comes through unexpected channels. The expansion of women's roles in Roman society didn't happen through legislative reform or philosophical argument alone, but through the accumulated achievements of women who found ways to succeed within existing systems, while gradually transforming those systems. The networks and institutions they created provided infrastructure for broader social change. The business practices they pioneered, the educational opportunities they funded, the cultural activities they supported all contributed to an environment where women's capabilities became increasingly visible and undeniable. Their legacy extends beyond ancient Rome to influence how we understand women's potential in any historical context. They demonstrate that human talent and determination can find expression even under the most constraining circumstances, that artificial barriers can be overcome through creativity and persistence. The sophistication of their achievements also challenges academic assumptions about pre-modern women's lives. The business acumen, political influence, and cultural contributions we've documented were occurring during a period that many scholars have characterized as uniformly oppressive to women. This suggests that we may need to re-examine other historical periods and societies to look for similar patterns of female achievement that have been overlooked or misunderstood. The Roman evidence shows that women's contributions to economic, cultural, and social development may have been far more significant than traditional historical narratives have recognized. The international scope of successful prostitutes' careers also provides insights into early globalization and cultural exchange. These women were operating business networks that spanned the Mediterranean world, facilitating trade, communication, and cultural transmission in ways that contributed to the cosmopolitan character of Roman civilization. Their success in navigating different legal systems, languages, and cultural contexts demonstrates sophisticated international business skills that were remarkable for any era. Some managed commercial operations across multiple provinces while maintaining residences in several major cities and serving clients throughout the empire. The technological and artistic innovations they sponsored also had lasting impact on Roman material culture. The architectural features developed for luxury brothels influenced residential construction. The cosmetic and textile innovations created for courtesans eventually became available to women of all social classes. Their patronage of artists and craftsmen also contributed to the flourishing of Roman visual and literary culture. Some of the most beautiful sculptures, paintings, and architectural features in Roman cities were created with funding from women who had earned their wealth through sex work. The medical knowledge they accumulated also contributed to advances in women's healthcare throughout Roman society. Their understanding of contraception, reproductive health, and general medical care was often more sophisticated than what was available through traditional medical sources. The business archives and financial records they left behind also provide valuable insights into Roman commercial practices and economic relationships. These documents reveal sophisticated understanding of investment strategies, risk management, and business planning that demonstrates remarkable commercial sophistication. As we conclude this exploration, we're left with a profound appreciation for the complexity and richness of these women's lives. They navigated social prejudice, economic uncertainty, and personal risk to build careers that provided not just survival, but prosperity and influence. Their achievements remind us that human potential isn't constrained by the circumstances of birth or the prejudices of society. When legal protections, economic opportunities, and social mobility were available, these women accomplished extraordinary things that challenged every assumption their society held about female capabilities. The world they created, with its networks of female entrepreneurship, its institutions of education and cultural development, and its models of economic independence and social contribution, provided foundations for women's advancement that influenced Roman civilization for centuries. Their legacy extends far beyond their own profession to encompass broader questions about human potential, social mobility, and the conditions that enable individual and collective flourishing. They proved that talent and determination can overcome significant obstacles when supported by appropriate legal and economic frameworks. In examining why prostitution was often the best option available to women in ancient Rome, we've uncovered a story that ultimately transcends its specific historical context. It's a story about human resilience, creativity, and the eternal drive for freedom and prosperity that defines our species at its best. These remarkable women didn't just succeed within their system, they helped transform it, creating new possibilities for female achievement that continue to inspire us today. Their lives remind us that progress often comes through the accumulated efforts of individuals who refuse to accept limitations and instead find ways to create better lives for themselves and others. Their legacy challenges us to look beyond surface judgments and moral assumptions to understand the complex realities that shaped historical women's choices and achievements. In doing so, we gain not just knowledge about the past, but insights into human potential that remain relevant for understanding our own world and possibilities. The evidence of their success stands as testament to what women have always been capable of achieving when artificial barriers are removed and genuine opportunities are provided. Their stories echo across the centuries, reminding us that human dignity and achievement can flourish in the most unexpected places and that the drive for betterment and independence is one of our most enduring and admirable characteristics. As we close this journey into ancient Rome's most misunderstood profession, we're left not with simple moral judgments, but with complex appreciation for the women who found in challenging circumstances the raw materials for extraordinary lives. They transformed limitation into opportunity, constraint into creativity, and prejudice into proof of their own remarkable capabilities. Their achievements stand as permanent testimony to the power of human determination and the endless capacity for innovation that emerges when people are free to pursue their own vision of success and fulfillment. In honoring their memory, we honor the best aspects of human nature itself,